did your artistic career as a painter begin?
It began in about 1971 or two. I was in the British Air Force, and I was posted to a very remote island in the Maldives, the southernmost atoll, the southernmost island. And it was, it was really remote. There were 500 or 600 guys on this island, no women. And I was there for 2 years, and there wasn't much to do when we weren't, actively on duty. And so, there was a wonderful library, and I discovered a book called The Masterpiece by Emile Zola, ostensibly about Cézanne. And it just intrigued me. I think then I had a whole 18 months or 2 years to think about what I wanted to do with my life, and it turned out to not be the Air Force. I made the decision pretty much there and then. Then I went to Amsterdam on leave when we came back with a friend. And I remember I was in a park and it was raining, and we went into what's called the Stedelijk Museum. And I saw these paintings by Barnett Newman, huge paintings, like 20 feet by 10, with just one stripe in the middle. And they blew my mind, frankly, coming from a non-cultural background. And of course I assumed, like most people, that they were done by some young New York kind of city person. They turned out to be done by a 70-year-old guy and a 75-year-old guy with a moustache and a nice suit, Barnett Newman, and I thought, wow, so you can come out of the Air Force, you don't have to be artsy, you can be a regular, thinking, intelligent person with a certain degree of sensitivity toward the arts, but you can make extraordinary paintings without being part of that sort of, if you like, glitzy art world. Not that I'm against that either, but I mean, for me then, coming out of the Air Force, I was searching for something extraordinary to do, coming out of the ordinary, my background.
Have you always worked with abstract representations of the natural world?
Yeah, I started studies. I took my bachelor's at Exeter College of Art. So I was a school then that was pretty lenient, but they did have life drawing, which I just flat out refused to do. Then there was much more of a almost fighting dialogue among painters and sculptors about what you could and couldn't do. I mean, real fights like Jackson Pollock in the bars in Long Island, where people would get into deep arguments. That's all over now because, it's hard to even speak your mind about anything. So there was a great discussion about figuration and abstraction, which continued through my life. I've mellowed a bit, but I always believed in abstraction as the most important, dominant theory of the 20th century, if you like. Not in a dogmatic way, like in music, between serialism or atonal music and melodic music. It's not that defined, but it's always been my aim to represent the world through what we call abstraction.
And what or who have been your greatest influences?
Well, it started out with the great modern American painters. There was a sort of in a weird way, a kind of heroism about what they did. But of course, we've since learned that the CIA was involved in promoting American art. And so Clement Greenberg and the CIA promoted certain artists for sure. Pollock and Rauschenberg and those guys. So anyway, but still American painting represented this sort of large-scale dramatic idea of what you could do coming from nowhere, like Jackson Pollock coming from Wyoming and coming to New York, or Bob Dylan creating mythology around yourself that would feed the work. So.
How has Japanese culture shaped painting?
But sorry,
Oh,
can
sorry.
I just? But then it morphed over the years into, and this is very important, a clear decision about whether to use the Renaissance as a starting point and move forward, so that one's influences would be, Velasquez or Zurbrand or Vermeer or going right up to Turner. But I didn't see a way to be original in that direction. And I saw these icon paintings in Patmos, which is a painting in this show called Icon Patmos. And a critic, David Carrier, who wrote the monograph, took me to the Museum of Art in Washington, D.C. and showed me these icons. And suddenly I found a way of some kind of original thinking, and even more importantly, original technique, by working my way back from the 15th century through Byzantium to the medieval, to the 10th century icon painting. It seemed to me a way to find a new language, which painters don't think about so much anymore, but musicians do. Think of people like Arvo Pärt, trying to rewrite Bach for the 21st century. I'm very into that musical influence, because they're the ones that are really out on the edge trying to do that. Yeah, so those are the two influences: American modernism and Byzantium.
And your interest in Japanese culture?
Yeah, well, because after graduating, I applied for what was called a Monbusho scholarship to go to Japan. And the chances of getting it were pretty slim. I don't think they'd ever given it to a painter. And in fact, when I went there, they didn't really know what to do with me. But I got this wonderful scholarship. It was very, well organized, well paid, and quite prestigious. And I always had an inkling for Japanese aesthetics. So I was reading Yukio Mishima, which is the theme of this exhibition, and I wanted to go there just to experience the sort of extremes of cultural differentiation that he was writing about, because Japan is another world. Of all the countries in the world, their music alone has no connection to what we hear in the West. Almost alone. If you think of the note theatre and the music, there's no. You wouldn't even find music as unrelatable as that if you went to the jungles of Borneo. There'd be something in their music that you'd get. So I wanted to go somewhere where I really didn't get it. And this was 1980. There were no signs in Western language. You couldn't really go anywhere without getting lost. It was incredible. There were no Westerners there in 1980. So, and people always connected my work to Japanese aesthetics. When I started out showing at the Listen Gallery in London with very minimal work. And it didn't last very long because my work changed. I didn't want to pursue that minimal area. It was too conceptual and too kind of British in a way for me to want to stay with it. When I mean British, I mean a group of painters like Alan Charlton, but I did start showing. I had some shows together with Carl Andre and Sol LeWitt, Donald Judd, who were very important to me then. They're not any more so much, only in aesthetics. So I picked up that Japanese aesthetic, the idea of sitting and looking at something for a very long time until you begin to understand it, which is again something our culture's been losing for many years because of the gadgets that we use, for want of a better word. So that's very much in me. Contemplation, meditation. And in fact, in Japan, they wouldn't even let me pick up a brush. I just go to this temple in Nara and watch a Zen master working on calligraphy for practically the whole time there. So it taught me a certain degree of patience, about technique.
What are your intentions for the viewer when experiencing your work?
Sorry, say that again.
What are your intentions for the viewer when experiencing?
Oh, for the viewer. Well, again, this is when I started out, it was more relevant than it even is today, because then you couldn't travel anywhere, without a lot of trouble and a significant budget. So I always had this idea of traveling. I've been all over the world. I lived in like 10 different countries. You go to somewhere like India and you see these amazing castles and forts and whole history and culture that goes with it. And I thought, how do you bring that home? How do you make a painting that makes you feel like you're in one of those places? That's been very important, and it still is, because we still can't all go to those places. And as the world gets somehow smaller through technology, our knowledge of what's out there gets more fleeting, to the point where most people truly who visit these sites go in order to send a picture back to somebody to say that they've been there, and often nothing more than that. So this idea, like with this one, we were just saying that by putting it on this pedestal, it gives it a more of an almost icon-like religious feeling to it, and it, just looking at it now, it puts me in mind of the medieval icons that influenced me in the church, the famous church in Patmos. So the way you can bring work and display it can put you back into medieval times somehow, I think, if you're open to it. So that's the intention, is just to summarize, is to enable a viewer to perhaps take their mind somewhere they've really never been before, or not even thought of going to. But that's one of the major attractions of abstraction.